Hello and welcome everyone to Genetics, Biology 326. This is a very exciting time to be studying genetics. We live in a society today where we're learning more and more about our genomes and about the genomes of organisms that surround us. Understanding genetics will help us in whatever profession we decide to go into, and it will also help us as citizens, because many of the things that we will encounter in society and at voting booths and as we talk with family and friends and peers will be enhanced by your knowledge of genetics. So before we start talking about genetics in great detail, let's kind of give a quick overview of how we're going to approach genetics this semester. In general terms, we're going to start with the molecule first, the DNA molecule. We'll talk a lot about this molecule. We'll talk about how we know it's the genetic material of life for most organisms. We'll talk about how it's constructed. We'll talk about rules that help regulate its shape and how the structures in it, the components of the DNA molecule will help us create specific traits through the process of making messenger RNA and proteins and other RNA molecules. As I said just a moment ago, will help develop traits, and I'm just going to draw a person here. So the traits that this makes this person or any organism is all because of the DNA and the environment. So we have traits here. And these traits, as I said, I'll repeat it real quick here, are the result of the DNA plus the environment. Now this process of going from DNA to traits, we can lump that up into one large category, which we'll call molecular genetics. The next thing we're going to be interested in is how are these traits from this organism, in this case a stick figure, how are they passed on to the next generation? So let's just draw smaller stick figures to indicate progeny that are produced. And so let's write inheritance here. How do we pass these traits on to the next generation? And we call this process here Mendelian genetics. Or sometimes we may call it transmission genetics. That is the rules that help govern how specific genes which encode traits are passed on to the next generation. Now over time, some of these traits are going to have certain advantages for that particular organism. Because even though I drew these all as one color, we know that over time, organisms that are produced, they will share many similarities to their parents, but they will also begin to look different as well. And this variation within this population is what allows for evolution to occur. And understanding these rules and understanding how certain traits can become more predominant in a population is what we call the branch of population genetics. So throughout this semester, we're going to begin talking about molecular genetics, and then we'll move into Mendelian or transmission genetics, talking about how traits are passed on, and then we'll begin to talk about how these traits and how they're inherited and how they generate variation and diversity within a population, how that can lead to evolution in the field of population genetics. I'm going to erase these top lines up here, letters I mean, and along the side here. And I want to remind you, while we're talking about all the rules and the regulations of genetics in these three branches of genetics, we're going to talk about it in context of a variety of life. So we'll talk about it in relation to bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. We don't know as much about archaea, but we will touch on that when we can. We'll also talk about genetics in relation to evolution, disease and health, and how this all affects society. Okay, now that I've explained to you the general content that you're going to be exposed to in genetics this semester, and some of the broader pictures of genetics, I want to take a few moments here to explain to you some of the differences that you'll experience in this class as opposed to a traditional lecture course. The model that we will be using in this class is a model that's loosely based on a concept called flipped, and we'll use something called team-based learning. In your syllabus, I provided a short website that you could go to that kind of explains how we flip a classroom and why students in a flipped classroom tend to learn the material better. Now, to explain what I mean by flipped classroom and by team-based learning, I want to draw a little diagram. As with most classes, and this class will be no exception, you will learn some things outside of class, and you will learn things inside of class. The way this course will work is that before you come to class, you will need to prepare. And what I mean by that is before you come to class, you will be asked to read from your textbook. So you'll have assigned readings. Now, what I have learned is that many of the textbooks that are used are pretty dense. There's a lot of material in it, and it's hard for a student to read that material for the first time and be able to pull out exactly what it is you need to know. It would be unfair for me to say, read chapter 5 and tell me what's important in it. So to help you with your readings that you're going to do on your own, I'm going to provide you with a couple of tools that will help break it down for you. The first thing is that I will provide you with note-taking guides. And in a moment, I'm going to show you where you find these at on Blackboard. So note-taking guides. And these note-taking guides will direct you to the pages that you need to read, and they will ask you specific questions about that material to help pull out what you need to know. And more importantly, the depth that you need to know the material. Because sometimes there's a lot more information in a textbook than I'm asking you to know. So it'll help you with the depth. Also, to help you with the depth and to help make the material a little bit more understanding, I will provide podcasts. The podcasts are just like you see here, and if you're watching this, you were able to find this on Blackboard without my help. For each class, you will have between 1 and 3 podcasts. Each podcast is roughly 15-20 minutes long, and it will go over the note-taking guides. Now, sometimes there will be things in the note-taking guides that aren't on the podcasts. There will be some things that you will need to kind of break down on your own, but most of the things you'll find are on the podcasts. As you're learning the material, I think it would be best to have your book open, have your note-taking guide out so you can fill those in, and watch the podcast. And that way you'll be able to fill in all the gaps. Now, what happens when you come into class is where the team-based learning comes into play. And I'm just going to write this as TBL for team-based learning. The first thing you'll do when you come to class, every class except for days when we have exams, is you will take a quiz. I'm going to put an I by this for now. That just means it's an individual quiz. You'll take this one completely on your own. Then you will retake that quiz, the exact same quiz, same questions, same answers, all that good stuff, but you'll take it with your group. This will take about the first quarter of the class. The remainder of the class is time that we will spend working on activities. The idea of this approach is that you will come to class knowing some of that basic knowledge, and so that we can break down that material and work on the activities, the actual application of that material, the kinds of things you will find on your exams. We feel it's better that you learn that material in class where you can ask questions and work with other students, because that's a higher level learning, as opposed to having to struggle with that on your own. I should mention a little bit about these activities. These activities may just be advanced problems. We may work on cases and other kinds of applications of the material. Now, after class, after you've completed these quizzes and activities, there will be a homework. Now, in this class, your homework will be delivered to you through the publisher's online learning material. You will have until Sunday to complete that material. So this is more problems, but it's going to be assessing how well you have learned this material. These will be due the following Sunday. So if you have classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, all that material will be due that Sunday. I make it due Sunday because I understand you have a lot that you're working on between this class and the other classes. This way you can fit it into your schedule. If you can, the best time to do this homework is shortly after class, sometime that day. I understand it's not always possible to do that, so I don't make it due that day. It's due Sunday, with a few exceptions where we have to make it due a little earlier because of the timing of exams. And then what we do is we start the cycle over again. You will prepare for class by doing additional readings, filling out additional note-taking guides, and watching additional podcasts. And then you'll come back to class and we repeat the cycle with a new TBO. As we go through this first week of classes, it'll become more clear how these different things come together. But what I'd like to do now is take a few moments to go to Blackboard and show you where you can find all of these tools. Okay, let's go ahead and go over some of the tools available to you through the Blackboard shell. The Blackboard page will look very similar to any other course that you've taken that you've used Blackboard with, but I did want to go over how this course is organized. On the left side, you'll see the same things you usually see. You'll see a tab for announcements, a tab for a syllabus. You'll see a tab for exams. There's nothing in that folder yet, but there will be something in there later on. You'll see a tab here for your lab worksheets. And right now, all you will see available to you on your Blackboard page is the material for week 1. As the semester moves forward, we will populate the Blackboard with additional lab material. Here you will find instructions on how to register your iClicker and how to log into Launchpad. There is a study guide for the final exam. I know that's a long ways off, but it's not a bad idea to go ahead and print that off so you know the areas that I'm going to stress throughout the semester so you can be better prepared for the final exam. This here tab is going to be probably your most important tab. It's course material by day. Under each day here, let's go ahead and click on, well, we can click on one, but day 1 doesn't have all the material in it just because it is there's not as much stuff we're doing on day 1. But as you click on each day, you will see what you have to do for that day, and in some cases what you have to do after that day. Let's go ahead and look at day 2. And I'll say here what's in this folder. So this folder contains the readings, podcasts, note-taking guide, learning curve assignment, and homework for day 2. Sometimes, like if you look at day 3, it says the folder contains all this material, but it doesn't contain the learning curve. And you'll see what learning curve in just a moment. Because chapter 10 we cover over days 3 and 4, and so the learning curve is placed in day 4. Alright, so let's click on day 2 and see what we have here. So we have the readings for day 2, we have the podcast for day 2, we have a note-taking guide, and we have the learning curve, which is something you need to do before class, and then there will be a homework assignment. Now most days will have both a learning curve and a homework assignment associated with them, but not all days. Let's go through each of these real quick. For those of you who are using a written textbook, a hard copy textbook, you may not ever go to this folder here. But for those of you who are relying on the electronic textbook, this is an easy way to link to the readings that you need to complete. So you just click on this tab, and it'll break down the different sections that you need to have read for that day. So let's just click on 1.1, and this will take you straight to the publisher's website. And here are the readings for that particular day. And then you can read this just like you would any other textbook. You get to the bottom, and it'll say read on, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So as you're going through the ebook, play around with the different abilities to take notes and other tools that are available as you're reading the material. All right, let's go back to day 2 course material. For each day, there will be anywhere between 1 and maybe 3 or 4 podcasts. On most days, the amount of time for the podcast will be less than an hour. There will be some days where it might be a little over, and I'll try to warn you ahead of time just so you can prepare appropriately. And so you obviously have found this because you're watching this podcast, but every day, as I said, there will be podcasts linked to that material. As you're watching these podcasts, one thing I would recommend that you do is that you write down everything I write down here and use this as your study guide or your study notes as you prepare for exams. In the past, students have told me that if they write down these notes, that it helps them learn the material and they're better prepared for the exam, and they even find that when it comes time to take the exams, they don't need as much time to study because they've been studying all along. As you're going through the podcast, I would recommend that you open up this note-taking guide. And so let's go ahead and click on the note-taking guide. And the note-taking guide is designed to help you guide yourself through the textbook material and the information you need to know. And so what we see here is for day 2, we have we have 3 objectives. And what I would recommend that you do is either print this out and then you can handwrite on these, or you can write on a separate piece of paper, or if you want, you can just type right here. So for instance, here we have what determines a trait. And so here you'll find by watching the podcast that what determines a trait is a combination of genes and the environment. And I would do this with each of these questions. What you'll find is as you answer these questions in these note-taking guides is that you're generating a very nice and effective study guide that you can use to prepare for the daily quizzes and the exam. Many students have told me in the past that they rely upon these note-taking guides and the podcasts primarily for the main sources of study, and go to the book only to fill in the little pieces that you can't find on the podcast. Another thing is that on some of the podcasts, note-taking guides, I will put an asterisk by a topic. What this asterisk means is that that material is important and you need to know it, but it's not going to be on the daily quiz. It very well may be on the exam or on the activity that we do in class, but not part of the quiz. Now, something you need to do before class, if you want the extra credit points, are these things called learning curves. So let's go ahead and click on this. Okay, now that we've clicked on the learning curve activity, what we see is a series of questions. Now, I've already started this, but the goal is to get from this end all the way to this end. And every time you answer a question correctly, you get a certain number of bars towards the end. So if I answer this question correctly, I will move all the way here. So it'll get me closer to the end. So let's look at this question. Which of the following would likely make the best model genetic organisms for studying developmental mechanisms of eukaryotic gene regulation? From your readings, you'll see that the best answer is fruit fly. And you can see that the bars moved all the way to the end. It also tells me how I'm doing on here. So you can see 56% on sections 1.2, 100% on the others. So it looks like whoever's taking this particular learning curve activity might want to focus more on section 1.2. So let's take the next question here. What is the relationship between genetics and evolution? Let's miss this one on purpose. We'll click this one. And it tells us we missed it. And it'll maybe give us a little hint like we see here. Or we can ask for a hint. But every time you ask for a hint, then the possible bars you can get goes down. So you don't want to do that too often. So let's click on this answer here, and you can see we got it wrong again. Let's click on this one. Oh, we finally got it right. We didn't move up that far. So let's go ahead and answer some more questions here. And let's go ahead and get to the end so you can see what happens when you've completed the assignment. And so this is the correct answer for this question. And it looks like we're going to have to answer one more question to get this last little bit completed. Okay. So it says I'm done with this. It tells me how I've done in certain areas. And so this should let you know, for instance, that in section 1.1, you're fairly proficient. So you probably don't need to spend too much more time on that one. These two areas, however, perhaps I didn't do as well on these. As you can see, only 61 and 67%. So these are going to be some areas that I would want to focus my studies on. I can go through and do more questions, and as you do more questions, they're going to try to give you more in this area to increase your proficiencies in that. And so I would encourage you, if you're doing poorly in one of these sections, to do more questions and see if you can raise those percentages. Now, one problem with this system that I have to warn you about is that there's no way for me, when I assign this to you, to ask it to only ask certain questions to you. So for instance, in Chapter 1 Learning Curve, if you looked at the note-taking guide and the syllabus, you would see that I didn't ask you to read this chapter here, this part of the Chapter 1. And so if you're doing poorly in that particular area, it's probably not that big of a deal, because I'm not holding you accountable for that, because that's not part of the note-taking guides. However, this one is. So this 1.3 section here, I'm going to want to make sure I spend a little bit more time with, because I'm not doing as well on that one. Unfortunately, you will get some questions from these sections shown here that I'm not asking you to know. And there's no way I can get around it. It's just a kind of the inherent problem of this system. So do your best to answer those. But if you do poorly on those particular sections, don't worry too much about it. Focus on the sections that I'm asking you to learn from the note-taking guides. Use those note-taking guides as your guides to know what you need to know, or what I expect you to know. So the last thing on these pages are the homeworks, and these have to be done after class. They don't have to be done right after class, but they will need to be done before the end of the next Sunday. So if you have a homework for day 2, this is on a Wednesday. This homework is due the following Sunday. This is to allow you to fit it into your schedule as best as you can. So, just to review, under course material by day, each day has a specific folder. Within each of these folders will be all the information you need to know for that day. All the quizzes, all the homeworks, all the podcasts and note-taking guides for each of these days. Hopefully this helps you organize your study plans a little bit more effectively. As you're going through this material for this podcast, if you have any questions at all, please let me know. I'll see you in class. Bye.